We are live. So, good evening,
Good
good
evening.
afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on when you're watching this. I am Kyle Arking. This is my YouTube channel. This is basically like the first real big live stream I've ever done on here that isn't like a test run or anything. We are basically here to talk about The Dark Knight. This is today's July 18th, 2023, and it marks the 15th anniversary of the release of The Dark Knight, which came out in 2008. So I established and gathered a number of friends to talk about this landmark film. And I'll start off first with Nick Zednick, or also known as Zeddy. Hey, Nick, how are you doing?
Good. I'm good. Happy to be here. What's up, everybody?
What's up?
Tyler,
What's up,
from
guys?
2 Point
Oh,
of Films.
no, 2.0.
2.0 films. You can find him on Twitter. How you doing, Tyler?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Beautiful Tuesday. Beautiful Tuesday.
Oh yeah. And Matthew Anderson. You can tell people where they can find you if you'd like.
I already have on my screen here. You can follow me on my personal Twitter account, Matthew05814152. And I also have coming up very soon, we're going to start our very first episode for the Lone Screenplay Nominee podcast, in which we'll be covering most, if not all, of the films that were only nominated for the Screenplay Oscar, and that's it. Our first episode will be on Knives Out. I won't reveal who the guest is, and I can give you a hint. It's no one in this chat room. So when the episode drops, that's when you will know who it is. But enough about that.
Nice.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about because it just feels like yesterday was when we celebrated the 10th anniversary of The Dark Knight. But it is once again 15 years since The Dark Knight came out. And once again, I don't believe there's a DC film that has still surpassed it, because that's the funny thing about The Dark Knight. It's always when a DC movie comes out, we hear the quote unquote saying, oh, this is either the best film since The Dark Knight or the best film, even better than The Dark Knight. And it's crazy to think that with the number of DC films we've gotten, whether it's the Batman, the Suicide Squad, the Flash, Wonder Woman, yet there's still something about this film that makes it still what many consider to be the best DC film and what many consider to be the best comic book movie, let alone one of the best movies. I think it's Empire's List ranked this as like
Hold on.
number
I'll tell you.
80.
I'll tell
Do you have
exactly.
it? Yeah, Tyler.
Hold on.
That'd be great.
Hold on. I'll be right back.
Yeah. It, to me, I mean, this movie holds a very special place in my heart. It's a film that I remember as a kid. Batman was always my favorite superhero. And when Batman Begins came out, it was this huge deal. I unfortunately wasn't able to see it in theaters because I was too afraid of the Scarecrow, and I didn't know exactly how they would use, the fear toxin and how they would use that character. I do think back, would I have been scared of it if I saw it? I might have, because when I saw King Kong, I had to leave the theater like an hour into the film when they got to Skull Island, because the entire island was filled with things that children really shouldn't see. And so maybe I wouldn't have been able to see it. But Batman Begins, I was obsessed with that film. I bought every book, every gallery, every photo, everything. And it was a movie that I loved. I watched every day when it came out on DVD. And it became like my favorite film. So when The Dark Knight came out, it had a lot of shoes to fill, and it also had a huge task ahead of it, because when we look at sequels sometimes, or most of the time, don't really outmatch the original. Usually a sequel comes out and it's like, oh, well, the first one was still the best, the first one was still better. And to many people, The Dark Knight came out and it's like it exceeded the expectations and it surpassed Batman Begins.
Yeah.
Now, for me, what happened was I saw it, and it was the first Batman movie I got to see in theaters as a kid, which really,
I think it was mine too.
really,
Okay.
I think so.
You want to know the list? Do you want to know where it lies?
yeah.
I
Where does it lie?
literally, so I collect Empire magazines. This was back
Nice.
from 20. Oh my God, what year is this? This would have
First year.
been 2014.
Yeah.
2014. Here we are, number 3.
Oh,
It's-
wow.
Empire's
It's
list,
number
okay.
3 on the list of the 301 greatest movies of all time.
What was number 1 and 2? Godfather and Citizen Kane?
Hold on, I'll tell you exactly. Give me 1
Casablanca,
second.
maybe.
No, I don't think it was that.
Those are great
actually.
movies.
Oh, they're great
Those
movies.
are
but
usually like the
Those are
top
great.
ones, from what I recall.
It is. I'll tell you exactly. Give me a second. Let me find
I
out.
wonder
again.
what, because I know there was one list where it was like number 80, but it was like number 80 on a list of the classic.
Empire. So Empire is considered number 1.
Okay.
Godfather number 2.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
But
probably
in all
about right.
honesty, that's a great That's a great place for this movie to be in.
Which is funny because if you look at those movies, you have Empire, which is a sequel, and you have Godfather, which inspires The Dark Knight and
Mhm.
the amount of
Well-
crime and everything in that film. So
Well, and the other thing too about The Godfather, not to jump ship on that, but that was also like a big influence on a lot of crime movies we got from the likes of Brian De Palma, Scorsese,
Michael
to
Mann.
where we got that whole wave of genre. But yeah, like Godfather is very much even good. Some of Goodfellas, with the crime element is in here. One thing I did want to jump on when you were talking about sequels is not only are most sequels usually pretty bad, but especially when directors or creative forces try to come back to do another movie,
yes.
it tends not to do well. We do have the few, even in our modern age now, where we have someone like James Gunn who came back to do Guardians 3 recently, and that turned out to be successful for the most part. And we've had other people like Spielberg when he tried coming back with Harrison Ford and George Lucas to do Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and that did not work out as well as everyone had imagined. So the idea of Chris Nolan to come back into this, and even when he did Batman Begins, the only thing that people were aware of was Batman's last time he was on the big screen was Batman and Robin, which I don't think was that big of a flop, but it didn't make the money that Warner Brothers wanted. And Chris Nolan at the time, I'm looking through his filmography right now.
Insomnia. I think it was either
was-
Prestige. I think it was
Well-
Prestige.
Well,
We did the
Insomnia.
he
Wait,
did
what are we talking about?
Chris Nolan. So Chris Nolan did Memento, which got him an Oscar nomination,
Yep.
and he did do Insomnia, and he did The Prestige as a way of
Yeah.
being able to sort of flex his like creativity capacity. Be like, okay, I need a break from Batman. Let me try to do this dueling magician movie and take it from there. And I, like you, Kyle, I've never seen Batman Begins on the big screen. I've only seen it on DVD and Blu-ray. I think part of it was just because my mom didn't want to go take my brother and I to go see a PG-13 film.
Yep.
And again, we did see Revenge of the Sith at the time, but that was a different exception to it. Um,
But the
So-
youngling scene was pretty
Oh.
pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
Wow.
So the other thing I also want to comment on, and we'll get to some of the more like detailed stuff in terms of the film itself, but I also want to mention me being more of an Oscar predictor than even Zeddy here. Is I want to bring up the fact that this was really, when you think about it, we need to talk about the fact that this was a big influence as to why we have the expanded ballad era, and what that is for anyone who isn't
the
aware of
Joker
that.
effect. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and for anyone
Well,
who
not
isn't
just the
aware of what it
Joker effect.
is, it's essentially, we for a long time with the Academy, they'd always
Yep.
nominate up to 5 movies.
Yeah.
And because it got snubbed for Best Picture, because everyone thought, oh, The Dark Knight's going to make it in with Slumdog Millionaire, Milk, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and then Frost
Changeling.
Nixon. And then, Changeling didn't make it into the Best Picture lineup.
Didn't.
No. So, and then because of Harvey Weinstein at the time, he was a big, popular executive, especially amongst Academy voters. They managed to overlook The Dark Knight and in favor nominated The Reader. And that was really the big reason why we have the expanded lineup today, to where now we have film, up to 8 or even 10 films max. That's why we got the 10 movies that we did. That's why we got Zeddy's favorite Triangle of Sadness or Don't Look Up getting in, is because of the expanded lineup. And now we, put as many of films in that lineup now, whereas it would have been just 5. But yeah, no, and yeah, as far as I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I remembered when I finished the movie in theaters with my brother, because it was my stepdad. He took my brother and I to go see this on the big screen. It was like maybe a couple days after, because we knew it was going to be sold out opening weekend. They're like, there's no way we're going to be able to get tickets for this. So I think we went on like a Monday or a Tuesday. And when it was done, I thought to myself, okay, this Chris Nolan guy, I got to keep an eye on him as a director, see what he does. And that's what got me into Inception. And then from there on, my brother and I were like, okay, we need to pay attention to see what this guy does next as a director. Yeah, but yeah, no, and there's a lot of great things about it. Obviously, you already said it's like one of the best sequels out there. It's the last like great DC movie that everyone agreed was that fucking good. Sorry for the language. But yeah, it's really, really great. And really, like I said, it's Chris Nolan that made the film what it is, and you have a great ensemble of actors. I mean, hell, even when I saw like a press junket for Oppenheimer, where the person interviewing Chris Nolan said, "You do realize that I've spoken with enough actors to say they'd be willing to work with you, for your movie, even if it's just like a cashier register, or whatever, cashier job." But yeah, no, I think it's a very influential film. And the last thing I'll point out before I pass the mic over to someone else, I'm not sure if you already mentioned this, Kyle, but the United States Library of Congress selected it for the preservation of the National Film Registry, which I think is the second DC film to do that. I think the first was the original Christopher Reeve Superman movie.
Makes sense, yeah.
So,
yeah, like I agree. Everything you said, Matthew. I mean, for me, I will say, and we can get into like our first experiences watching it for the first time, but I made my dad see it at the midnight screening because I was too afraid of what the Joker would look like and how, as a child, I would react, because I was only about 9 years old when it came out. And when I was a kid, clowns terrified me. I surprisingly wasn't really that terrified of the Joker, but I remember just the tone of Christopher Nolan's films, that realism. I didn't know how that would gel with me as a child. And I remember I would have these situations where I would tell my parents, whenever a new picture of Heath Ledger as the Joker would be revealed, I told them to cover up the picture, and then every time like they would reveal a facial feature, they'd open up their hands even wider. And I still remember, if you guys remember Borders, I went to Borders once, and that was like the first time I looked at the official first picture of Heath Ledger as the Joker, and it was that picture of his lips, and you don't even see his eyes because it's just so dark. And I remember I told my mom, easy now, just be careful. And finally, like when I told my dad to see it in theaters, I want to see this movie opening day. So I made him go see it at midnight, and I waited till he came back. And it was like 12. It was probably till like 2 or 3 in the morning till he came back home. And it was like the latest I ever kind of stayed up for, but I think I went to sleep, then woke up. And I remember I asked him all these questions. How was it? How was this? And all my dad wanted to do was sleep. And I was like, did Harvey have a girlfriend? Does he become Two-Face? What's he look like? Does Joker kill all these people? What's, I was asking all these questions that now I wouldn't even want to know. And my dad was good enough. He didn't tell me, oh yeah, Rachel is dating Harvey Dent and she dies in the movie. Thankfully he didn't say that. He didn't even tell me, because that was a big surprise for me that she dated Harvey Dent. I didn't see that coming. I wasn't as well versed in the news at the time for the film. But then my dad got sick from going to the midnight screening. So we didn't end up seeing it opening day. Thankfully, he got better by Saturday, and we saw it then. And at that same time, I got those novelizations. So the Dark Knight novelization came out that same day that the movie opened, and I read about up to, I think it was when the Joker introduces himself to the gangs and the mob, and I was like, oh boy, I really want to read more of this, because I didn't care about spoilers back then. I would read as much about these movies as I could. And then when I saw it, I was struck by, especially reading it, I was struck by the fact that Joker isn't in the movie as much, especially in the beginning of the film. He disappears, I would say, for about a half an hour or so, and it becomes very much more Batman-centric, Harvey Dent-centric. So as a kid, I was like, wow, that is something I didn't expect. I expected the movie to be Batman Joker from beginning to end, because that's kind of like what the original Tim Burton Batman movie is. You get Batman, you get Jack Nicholson. And here it was really interesting, especially if you look at the marketing for the film, the posters of the film. They have Batman, Harvey Dent, Joker. And those are like the three main characters of this film. So you get to spend time with these characters throughout the movie. And I just remember seeing it that first time. I was enamored. The Joker and Two-Face are my two favorite Batman villains. So the fact they put them in the same movie, I just loved. I was shocked when they killed Rachel off, because for me, like, I'm so used to seeing the hero save the girl time and time again.
Yeah.
And that, I remember that was a very shocking thing. Thankfully, I wasn't scared of the Joker watching the film. I was scared of the jump scares in this movie, because I don't know if you guys remember it, but in this movie, if you saw it in the theater, there are a number of jump scares.
Quite a bit.
Like, I think the worst
the body.
Yes.
That falls, yes. Let me tell you, the sound design, as much as we've been shitting on, Nolan's sound design for Tenet, seeing The Dark Knight on a film, that whole scene, that scared the shit out of me. And I knew it was, it's coming, and it's so good. It was so good on film. And I caught more of the Joker's dialogue on film than I do watching it in 4K, which I thought was very interesting. I'm like, oh,
because you're there, like, you are basically in. You feel that when you're watching a film in the theater, you are in that movie, essentially. And and that's one of the best parts about the production design, about the way that Nolan paints this universe, Wally Feister's cinematography. It really immerses you in the Gotham City. There is criticism that, it just looks like Chicago, but it's like,
there's even a sign where, like, as the Joker is walking with a machine gun towards Batman,
welcome to Wrigley Field.
it's like there's a sign that says it's like Chicago, whatever. It's like, really, you could?
Oh, really? I never know.
I see every set every day, so I know.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
that's funny.
The one thing I did find funny, because it was the body scene. Obviously, that was a big jump scare, because I remember my brother he leaned over to me and he goes, "Okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom." And as soon as he got up and you saw the jump scare with the body, he's like, "Never mind, I can hold it in." Like, I'm good. I also, I'm not sure if any of you had a chance to do this, but I managed to stumble accidentally on the side, at least going past some of the set for The Dark Knight when they were filming. And what happened was, I can't remember the specifics, but we had to, the traffic was so long and it was so slow that we ended up going around, and we saw this, like, flipped over truck that was demolished. And we're like, what the hell is going on here? Was there an accident? And then we do like another turnaround or whatever, and it's gone all of a sudden. And then we walked by and there was a PA nearby or whatever, or gaffer. And
I work on movies, so this makes perfect sense to me.
And so he was asking, so my stepdad was asking, what's going on here? Oh, they're making the new Batman movie with Chris Nolan and Christian Bale. I'm like, oh, okay. We didn't stick around to watch the whole thing because it was like late at night. We were hungry and we were tired. So,
that's so cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
Now, Zeddy, I want. What was your first reaction of the film when you first saw it, if you remember?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating for me because I Batman Begins was the first Batman movie that I saw in theaters, and I was 10 at the time. And then The Dark Knight comes out 3 years later, so now I'm 13. So obviously I can comprehend film a little bit better than I would have even when I saw Begins. But there was just, I remember there's just a certain energy going into that movie that like you just felt like when you walked into that theater that you were gonna see something pretty magical and spectacular. Like everybody felt it when you go in a theater, and it's a rare achievement because not every film has that going for it. Obviously there was the Heath Ledger stuff going on at the time too, before the movie came out. So it did have that going for it too. But it's just a movie that it's ironic how culturally relevant it still is even today. Like it's amazing that it is 15 years old. To be quite honest, and it's funny because if you had asked me, is that my favorite Batman movie of all time? 2 people on the screen know that the answer is no. It actually still is Batman Begins. And while I think it's one of the greatest movies ever made, I still think the greatest Batman movie of all time is Begins, only for the simple fact that as many times as I've seen The Dark Knight, my one sense of that movie is so that you can still take Batman out of that movie, and it still is equally as great as a movie with or without Batman. So that's kind of where I land on that. But yeah.
I think what's interesting about The Dark Knight is the fact that when it came out, from what I recall, because like I think you guys definitely have a better memory of exactly what happened, but what I recall, that film took the world by storm. Like
it did.
You're you're talking about a movie that really
my neighbors were talking about it. That like as a kid, I couldn't go and watch PG-13 movies, and my mom was very much against like dark films for us to see. Mind you, I snuck in. I watched R-rated PG-13 movies when I was with my friends all the time. But it was I remember vividly sitting at the pool and talking to my neighbors about the movie and how blown away they were by it. Like it wasn't, and again, it's not a comic book movie. It is, but it's way more than that. Like the whole element that's still very prevalent today about mass surveillance. Like that's a huge issue that we are still dealing with today. Like there's and it's still dated too, like the Nokia phones.
Yeah.
Like I thought that was just like that's how you date it a little bit, but it's still so good.
Dude, I'm telling you, like I live in Chicago, so like there's all this stuff about like where this scene was filmed. I still remember it. I mean, like my dad is a UPS driver, and he drives in the city like every day, and he even points to me. He's like, this is where they flipped the car on Lower Wacker Drive, and this is where the Batcave was. This is so. It's just fascinating to think that like I'm in such an integral part of one of the greatest movies ever made, and I see almost every location every day. It's amazing.
Cool.
It's amazing how practical Nolan truly made everything. It really is still to this day.
And it is. And that's why I think too they were able to keep the budget as low as they were able to keep it, and why it was still, why it's so like Nolan. As much as people want to shit on Nolan, man, he really does know how to do a fucking movie, and I think it's also that too. Like, I think the biggest flub that WB has made in the last, I would say, 10 years is losing Nolan as a director. Like he made he helped make WB what it is in the 21st century. The Dark Knight did such a great thing for them.
Yeah.
And so did The Dark Knight Rises. Like they're all financially successful films. And they basically help spawn DC films for them.
It also helps that every movie he's made for Warner Brothers almost, aside from his earlier ones, has almost touched 800 million. If not, did anybody really expect Inception to make as much as it did, or Interstellar for that matter?
Yeah, well, Tenet, I was going to say it was a flop, but that was for different reasons. But
that was
the budget on this is still like it's sure it's smaller than what Tenet was or even Dark Knight Rises was, but it's still like a respectable 185 million.
Yeah.
It's just the way he uses the budget.
Yeah.
You look at even a lot of these, like even put The Flash aside, for example, like we're seeing Indiana Jones: The Dial of Destiny is nearly like 300 million or even more, And when you watch it, you're
That's
like, I don't mean to
insanity.
shit on James Mangold because I like him as a director, but like, it's why it doesn't even like all you're doing is just throwing a bunch of effects at the screen, and you're not even paying your writers that well.
Yep.
Even
Yeah.
something like the Jurassic World movies, it's like like one of them
Jurassic
was
World I liked. The
Well,
first one I really liked.
well, like the what was it? I think it was the second or third one. It was I can't remember which one it was, but they were budgeted like $400 million for your budget, and I'm like,
That's
where's this
insanity.
money going? Because I'm still hearing reports from not just well, if it isn't from your movie, it's from other people too who aren't getting their due pay, like the
Yeah.
visual effects artists.
Uh-huh.
So, like, where's this money going? Is this a money laundering scandal going on that the executives aren't paying up? But anyways, but I think the other thing that a lot of comic book films unfortunately didn't take away from the film wasn't that obviously you need to create like you need to have really clever writing and great directing and great acting. It's really just how to make a fucking movie. Like you like again, like the DC films, you know, like I'm not really the biggest fan of the recent output that have been out, like was it Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman, and a lot of it is just because that they're putting a lot of, in my opinion, not that experienced or that well crafted filmmakers behind it. Like they're not letting the filmmaker, or even then, they're not letting filmmakers like creative ones come on board to do this. You know, and I get that there are some cases where, okay, maybe it wasn't a good idea to bring in on board, because the one thing I'm not sure if Kyle or any of you guys mentioned before, Darren Aronofsky got really close to doing Batman Begins. And you know, as much as I really like his films a lot, I don't know if he would have been the right choice for that film because of the big scale that comes with it. And in my opinion,
Yeah, he was gonna make Batman Year One. I remember that.
It would have been. I don't think it would have been a hit. Like I don't know how you could, especially when what we've heard of, like the screenplay is released, like it's out there. We know what's in that movie. It's more of like like it's far beyond what Batman Begins is. It is more, you know, R-rated in terms of what it explores, and it's not something that I feel would have captured, you know, the audience. Especially, I think what Batman Begins did, and Christopher Nolan is a major part of this, it brought Batman back. Because Batman Robin, whether you love it or hate it, it's undeniable that film left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, where they had that IP so buried in their, you know, like when you look at Batman Begins, it's coming out and now it takes the world by storm, but really it's The Dark Knight that comes out after that that is able to, you know, really take the world by storm. So you have like Batman Begins as like the foundational standpoint, and then you have The Dark Knight as what builds upon that foundation. And it's something that really, I don't know how Darren Aronofsky, I mean, I don't even see him sticking around for a sequel. And as I was researching Dark Knight before this, like even Christopher Nolan, when they made Batman Begins, he was unsure whether he'd make another one. And it's like, I think it's really, really commendable when you look at what they accomplished with The Dark Knight, that they ended up making a film as good as that one, when really a lot of the cards were stacked against them. They had a great, you know, first movie in Batman Begins, but it could have really, you know, fallen by the wayside. One of those elements, I've seen some criticisms with like Two-Face being in the movie. Like I think some people think it's rushed the way that he is, you know, he becomes Two-Face at the end. But I completely disagree. I think Two-Face is perfectly utilized in this film. And we've seen time and time again with superhero sequels that use a lot more villains in it than what we're normally used to. And they tend to, like, if you look at Amazing Spider-Man 2, that's a great example of a film that it's like Electro. It looks like Electro is going to be, you know, the main villain. And then look, Green Goblin is the main villain at the end. And it's like, no.
And then the Rhino shows up for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's like, but Dark Knight, Two-Face is a villain as a result of Joker, as a result of what he's done. And that's what I love.
And also, So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So what I was gonna say is this too, and it kind of brings this whole conversation back to right now. Is you watch Batman Begins, you watch The Dark Knight, and you can watch Cillian Murphy's performances with Christopher Nolan and the way that it has progressed until now when he is a lead in a Nolan movie. I think it is very subtle. His performances are very subtle but very good as Scarecrow. Like, he doesn't steal the show by any means, but he carries his own. And it's just a beautiful thing to watch their friendship and their work relationship grow from there to almost being the lead in Dunkirk to now he's the lead. You know, like it's beautiful.
Well, and I think what also started too wasn't just being in Batman Begins, but you know, he auditioned for Bruce Wayne as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And even though he wasn't the right choice to play that character,
he still wanted him.
I think it was Chris who said, "Yeah, I want him to play Scarecrow." And I think he had to persuade the executives to like, no, trust me, I think it's gonna work. Let me bring him in. And yeah, and you know, while we're talking about performances, we might as well get into it right now. Heath Ledger gave a great performance, and he's only, I mean, Kyle already mentioned he's not in it a whole lot, or someone did, and he's only in it for like more than half an hour altogether. And I think what makes it, it's always fascinating to me, like the performance, like any other actor who is taken from us way too soon. And you look at their career, and he had a really, really impressive career. You know, he had Brokeback Mountain. He did other dramas like Monsters Ball was another one he did. You know, other stuff. That. You know, 10 Things I Hate About You, Knight's Tale.
Yep.
And he's been an interesting and fascinating actor to begin with. And to see him put all the commitment and really, like, because even he said when he was asked to be the Joker, he's like, I don't like if it's like, because I think he assumed it was going to be like the Tim Burton's world of Batman, but once he saw Batman Begins, he's like, okay, I could do it, I'll do it. And he really, you know, he did his homework, he did the time, no BS. And also Michael J. White, I think that's the actor's name in the film. He went on to an interview, I think, for Collider News, where he was commenting about how the publicity would, you know, like, it was such BS that everyone was saying like, oh yeah, this is the role that got Heath Ledger killed from, you know, painkillers or overdoses or whatever. And it's not. And, you know, even he said on set in between takes, he would just, you know, sort of get out of character, be like, hey, what's up, man? How you doing? You know, things like that. And, you know, like it always is. It sucks to see someone like him get taken away from us so soon. And you see the work that he puts into the role. You know, you could argue the same thing for like Brandon Lee or Chadwick Boseman. You see these like really good actors, or at least, you know, had great potential to become more than what they were given in their final roles. And I'm really happy that he got the Oscar, not just because he, you know, he deserved it, but also it is one that unfortunately has been memed to death a lot and been mimicked a lot by people. Even at cons.
What's really interesting about the Joker and Heath's performance is the fact that going into that movie, I think the most iconic Joker at that time was Jack Nicholson.
Yeah,
he was the one that a lot of people really thought of as their their default Joker. The one that, I mean, when Heath Ledger was coming on, they're comparing him to Jack, and they're like, well, I've seen this guy in 10 Things I Hate About You, Brokeback Mountain. That's not, you know, Jack Nicholson's Joker. He won't, you know, match up. And it was funny because I remember, I think I read an interview about how like Heath Ledger said, oh, I love Jack Nicholson's performance as Joker. It was great, but I wanted to do something different. And I think it's pretty much a fact at this point that Heath Ledger is right now like the most iconic Joker to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Not only is he like iconic in the sense of being, you know, a really loved Joker, but like if you go to a costume shop or a Halloween store, like a Spirit Halloween or Party City, they still sell Heath Ledger's Joker costume.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they don't do that with Jared Leto's Joker.
No.
They don't do that.
I
with-
wonder why.
Well, they don't do that with like Jack Nicholson's. He's the one that still has stood the test of time. And I remember when I saw Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, I said this was a performance that I think finally could match up to Heath Ledger. I'm not saying it was better than it, but it was the
Yeah.
first time I saw, because like as much as I did, I actually like Jared Leto as a Joker, but as much as I did like him as a Joker, you know, it was still like a really supporting role in Suicide Squad. But to see this performance by Joaquin Phoenix, I was blown away. However, that Joker being this Elseworlds Joker, I think kind of makes that Joker not as relevant as Heath Ledger's is. And it's one of those things where you watch, many people still have a lot of fun with Heath Ledger's Jokers, despite how dark and, you know, awful he is in the movie. He's like, he has some funny jokes. He has some.
Oh my
funny
God, yeah.
scenes.
Yep. We were
And-
still laughing
right?
in the theater. There were people still laughing at his like, let's not blow this out of proportion.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like they're
How about a
and they
magic
were-
trick?
And he's hanging on.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that part, like everybody was fucking like, oh my God, this is so, you know, even if you've watched it.
Or
How-
using hand sanitizer in a hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, and then also
Poor
him
choice of
fidgeting.
words.
No, I think the best one too. One of the best ones was him fidgeting with the detonator, and he's
Yeah.
like, "What? Like he's looking
Yeah.
back at it, like, what? Come on, like,
Yeah.
like there." And that's the thing too. Like, it just it goes to that. Like,
Mhm.
it's gonna keep standing the test of time. It's gonna be considered, I think, for the next 100 years, one of the best performances ever done. And it was just like, I love that part too, where he burns all the cash, and he's like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not here for the money. I'm just here to burn the shit to the ground. Like,
Mhm.
that's also like, we don't get villains like that. We don't get villains who are, they don't have any motivation but to cause outright anarchy and chaos
Mm.
and rip the foundation from the ground. And it's
Mm.
like that's also something too that so many have tried to live up to, but they haven't been able to
But
nail,
also,
especially in the comic book world.
the thing about what makes this Joker so really fascinating is the fact that we don't know his backstory.
Yes.
And that, I mean, in the comics, it's something that he's always been like an unreliable character where you don't really know. Alan
Mhm.
Moore, when they wrote The Killing Joke, Alan Moore ended up giving him a bit of a backstory in that graphic novel, but and that's what we see in Tim Burton's Batman, but we don't have that. Like, what makes this Joker so exciting is the fact that when he says all these different backstories, all these different things about, you know, my father was a gambler, or, you know,
Mean drunk. He was
Yeah.
a mean
it
drunk.
just, it's
like,
it's, I mean, at first you're like, who is he? But then when you start to realize what they're doing, it's really smart. And I was reading about how like Nolan wanted them to make him ominous and mysterious because that's what made so many of these other villains so intimidating, like Darth Vader. And I mean, that's why it's always hard when you have characters in sequels where they try and go back and they tell the prequel of what made this villain bad. Sometimes it's best to leave it as it is. And he just is so rich, even though we don't know his backstory, compared to other villains like Loki, Thanos, Killmonger, where we do know those backstories, which also make them compelling. But he's one of those rare ones where you don't even want to know where he comes from. What do you guys think of that, whole thing?
Well, and also too, we also have to look at some of these horror icons, like when they do these like ridiculous reboots and remakes, like the Texas Chainsaw, where it's like, ooh, we got to show we got to show what his face looks like, outside of the skin mask he's wearing. Ooh, let's do a prequel by Platinum Dunes and all this fucking bullshit. But no, I like the fact that they don't give us an idea of who the Joker was before he became the Joker. And I find it very ironic that, as you said, we don't get the backstory or the full details um of this character here, but in the Tim Burton one, we do. And also too, like with Burton's film, we didn't really get a whole lot of like detailed analysis or background regarding with Bruce Wayne. Like we got enough to fill the story, but it wasn't like this huge exposition dumps of who he was. Whereas the Nolan films, the focus is very much on Batman himself.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's just that's something I always liked. And I think one of the only few times, and maybe some of you might agree with me on this, where if they ever did a prequel to explain like the origin of said character, was something like X-Men First Class, maybe. Or if
Mhm.
we want to look outside of the comic book era, which is technically a sequel to, Godfather Part Two is a pretty good way
Yeah.
of showing Vito Corleone going into power. At
Yeah.
such a young age, or at least learn, what kind of hoops he had to get through to become that powerful gangster. So, yeah.
I do think X-Men First Class is a good example of giving, like, they were best friend, Xavier and Magneto and Charles, and they were all best friends, and how that all came together. I thought
Yeah.
that was a great way to do it, and
Mhm.
that's the right way to do it, And
Mhm.
I still think too, people might shit on me for saying this, but I don't care. I think Days of Future Past is a great sequel. So,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, of course.
like, it's
I
great.
mean,
It's a
Who
great
doesn't
movie.
like it?
It's a great movie.
to be fair, I can understand why some people would shit on it because of the person who directed it. But
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
but
another,
that's
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 another
besides the
conversation
point.
another
But
time.
that's
Yeah,
besides the
exactly.
point. I
Also, should have
agree
been the
with
last one.
Eh,
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, and no, Heath Ledger just did a great job in the role, like we keep saying over and over again. And
Mhm.
Do you
and
do you guys think when it comes to how well received he was, do you think that I mean, like, this is all like a what if type of scenario, but I do wonder if he was still around,
would he have been in the Dark Knight
not
Rises?
just that, but if they would have continued the saga, because like you have Joker, you have Heath giving one of the greatest villain performances of all time. I do wonder, because when I was rewatching Dark Knight the other night, I said to myself, because could this have continued where we could have seen more Dark Knight films with Batman and Joker and seen more of this? Because as I've heard many times, it's like he wasn't really intended to even be in the next film, regardless.
Yeah.
Joker, you're talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounded to me like, before Heath Ledger's untimely passing, it did seem like to me that
Leave it open.
he was gonna, but like he could come back for the sequel, because the idea, I'm sorry to say this, but the idea of having to go from Batman Begins to, the League of Shadows, then you do the Dark Knight, which focuses on something completely different, and then to go do the Dark Knight Rises, but now we're going back to the League of Shadows. That doesn't really sound like an ideal plan for a trilogy to begin with. Like, I get it. We've seen franchises, like the Star Wars trilogy, even the new sequels, where they plan them out one by one. But even then, like, you have to have some sort of like simple blueprint,
Well,
or whatever it is.
the only thing I could have seen is like with Joker, it could have been like a Scarecrow type of situation where he makes like
Maybe.
a cameo or something. But then again, it's like this is different than Scarecrow. I think Cillian Murphy, he is right now the ultimate Scarecrow to me. I don't know how anyone could even match his performance as Scarecrow, but when it comes
Let's
to
see what James Gunn does.
We'll see, but when it comes to that performance, that's a performance that isn't something that it distracts people. So you can have him in a cameo, and it doesn't feel like, oh, the Scarecrow's there. Oh boy, like I'm distracted. But he, as Joker, was such a powerful force. I don't know, like if you had him in the Dark Knight Rises as a cameo, that may have been very distracting. And I do wonder, I mean, I have to even look into it some more, but I believe like they like the League of Shadows, that isn't, in my opinion, I think that's an interesting way of going about it because you're bringing it back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And I do love the idea of the pit in that film and how it's
Yeah.
essentially a metaphor for how he rose out of the pit. But instead of him being helped out of the pit in Batman Begins, he gets to get out of the pit himself. And I do like that, like the metaphors and the symbolism of all of it. But I don't know, like, it's such a fascinating angle with the Joker because he took over he had such a presence in that film.
Yeah.
But, you know, I will show you guys because I find it funny how when the movie was coming out, they had no idea when it came to the merchandise how to sculpt Heath Ledger as the Joker. And when they made the toys for kids, I don't have one on me, but one of the toys for kids literally looks like a cartoon character. He doesn't even look remotely anything like Heath Ledger's Joker. And the one that I have here, this was like when it came out, it was part of Mattel's DC Movie Masters line, where he was actually like a really sought after figure at first. It took me like months to find him as a kid. But like even this figure, which is supposedly like for like the collectors, it doesn't even like, I think
it looks a little bit.
I think it's because the makeup is so clean
Yeah.
and we're used to
The
you
scars
know,
and everything is there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's slightly, but it's so funny to me because like if you look at ones that are made now, of course, they can capture him in
Like
a much
Hot
better
Toys?
light.
Like
yeah,
the Hot Toys one? Yeah.
Or
I do wonder though, with his passing, I wonder if they asked the family to say, "Can we still use his likeness for the earlier line?" And then as like after he won the Oscar, and maybe as the years went on, they're like, "Okay, we'll approve of this because we trust you guys will do a good job with it." It just, I guess at the time, maybe it might have been like you know, a bit insensitive to be like, "Can you guys let us mourn?"
Yeah,
I don't know.
Michelle could have been like, I don't think Heath would have liked it as much like this.
Well,
I
even
think
with
even his parents would have way more, I think, to say.
They would be the ones to say more about it.
Yeah.
The one thing I did want to ask while we're talking about The Dark Knight, have any of you seen the Michael Mann movie Heat?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I saw it in theaters. I just saw it on theaters last year.
You're
And
so
it was
lucky, Tyler.
phenomenal. It was so freaking good. The end LA gun battle, hearing that in a theater was one of the coolest experiences you will ever have. The sound design is unparalleled.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, you know, because obviously Chris Nolan said he I think he showed the crew prior to filming for The Dark Knight, like, this is the kind of vibe I want for The Dark Knight, is this. And I just find it very funny because even when I finally showed my brother Heat like a year or two ago, and he was like, "Yeah, this is very eerily reminding me of The Dark Knight."
Oh yeah,
which it is. And that's definitely the influence that he was taking on in terms of that crime persona, and even taking these like multiple characters with their own arcs and such. And even just the technical merits too. Like, I think it's a really well crafted movie. We already mentioned the cinematography by Wally Pfister. It's got really good art direction. It really, even to this day, it still surprises me that the film got what, like 8 Oscar nominations altogether. And it won 2. Like we said, Heath Ledger won supporting actor, and it managed to upset in the sound editing category. And it was also nominated for production design, cinematography, film editing, makeup, sound mixing, and visual effects. And
just didn't get the big one.
Obviously it wasn't nominated for best picture.
Or director.
And that's the other thing too about it, though, is that we also want to bring up too that Nolan, for the longest time, kept getting snubbed year after year for director. Like, he got in at the Directors Guild of America for Memento, this, I think it was, Inception, and then he finally got nominated for directing for Dunkirk, which, you know, I personally would have voted for him in director for Inception, but I'm at least glad he's got a directing nomination to begin with.
And I wouldn't, from everything that we are hearing about Oppenheimer right now, from how much it is getting praised by really high level critics, I wonder if he's got a big I wonder if he's got a big chance this year, which would
Well-
be freaking amazing to watch that happen. To
Yeah.
go from where, because it is. I think Nolan is destined to get an Oscar. He's like Leonardo DiCaprio, you know, like he gets there, but he hasn't nailed it just yet, but he's going to soon enough.
I don't know. Not to try to stay on this topic too long, but I don't know if Nolan could ever win an Academy Award per se. I don't know. We'll have to see because I've been proven wrong. And hell, I mean, even Zeddy, when Zeddy and I we were talking about it last year, a
Yeah.
buddy of ours, a mutual friend, thought that Austin Butler was going to win for Elvis back in June. And I said, dude, it's the summer. We have all year long. We don't even know if we're getting any kind of award show with the whole strike going on, so to speak. And even if we do, there could be another person that comes in and says, hey guys, I'm the big talk of the town, and they get to win the Oscar. And that's exactly what happened with Austin Butler, was someone else
Yeah.
beat him out. So, but for all we know, who knows? Maybe Nolan does get nominated for Oppenheimer, and maybe you are right. He does win the Oscar, or maybe he just gets snubbed entirely.
I do think it's gonna be, but if there's gonna ever be like a heavyweight Oscar campaign going on, it's gonna be this year with Oppenheimer, with maybe Greta Gerwig, maybe for Barbie, and then Killers of the Flower Moon.
It's like
There's a
Dune.
lot coming out at the Dune. There's
Yeah.
a lot coming out this year that's gonna make the 2024 Oscars like watching a heavyweight fight go on, and it is gonna be whoever wins is it's gonna be glorious to watch who wins.
Yeah, though I do
Yeah.
want to go back to
Yeah.
the idea of like when The Dark Knight just took the world by storm. It made $1 billion.
Yep.
It was a film
Yeah.
that people were seeing again and again,
Yep.
and it was. I remember it stayed number one at the box office for a long time. I mean, it wasn't as long as like Avatar, but it stayed throughout. I think the summer, I
Yep.
believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you also had what was interesting about I think the performance of The Dark Knight is it came out the same summer as Iron Man 1.
Came out
Yeah.
after.
May 2nd or May 7th, it came out, which
Yeah.
I think is really interesting that Iron Man didn't start this really big boom in comic book movies, and The Dark Knight dwarfed it when it came to its reception at the time. Now, I do think Iron Man is a freaking fantastic comic
Mhm.
book movie, and I think Robert Downey Jr., man, that's another just like great what would you call it? Like great
Underrated performance.
not even just that, but he's
An
the
underdog.
kid that could underdog. Yeah. Like
I-
that's an amazing underdog story that is just it is fascinating that the movies only came out because I looked that up. I think it was yesterday. It was this morning. I was like, I knew it came out in 2008, but I was like, I couldn't
May and
remember.
July.
Yeah. No, but I
It-
mean, this came out in July, but Iron Man came out in May.
Yeah.
So
And-
it's like it's just so
And
interesting.
The Incredible Hulk came out in June.
Yeah.
It did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's,
I
well,
thought it was later than that.
No.
yeah, it was June.
Whoa.
One thing I do find a little bit funny, the irony in that years later, like these two comic book movies that came out in 2008 that sort of started this whole renaissance, whether good or bad, depending on how you feel.
It's a good point.
It's funny how years later, yeah, Nolan and Downey Jr. would team up to do Oppenheimer years
Yeah.
later.
Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't even think about that.
I
You
love
know, it's
that.
like,
I love
wow,
that.
you know.
15 years
Parallel.
later.
Yeah.
Like,
Um,
it's like that too. Like no matter how long it takes, there are two roads. No matter how long it takes for those roads to keep going, they will intersect with one another. And I think that's
It was
that's
really
so
like
freaking
2008.
phenomenal.
2008 was Downey's summer because not only was he in Iron Man 1, but he also had that cameo in Incredible Hulk. And
Yeah.
then the
Thunder.
Oscar-nominated performance in Tropic Thunder. So,
Which
and
is
that was in
so
August.
good.
So
It's so
you had
good.
like this whole. I love how we're talking about this because you really like. I mean, I personally think you know, you can look at Spider-Man 1, you can look at X-Men as the start of like the big comic book boom, but it's really like where we're at now, it's really 2008 because we get Iron Man 1 and we get The Dark Knight, two films from DC and Marvel that are really, you know, I mean, I personally think, and I know that I think a lot of people will disagree with me, but I do think that Iron Man 1 is the best MCU movie. And therefore, I don't think a film really has surpassed it in the MCU. I would even argue, well, my favorite one with Iron Man 1 is Incredible Hulk. So, like, that 2008 timeline, like that, for me, it hasn't surpassed it. And Dark Knight is also one of those where there hasn't been a DC film to surpass it. Not even The Dark Knight Rises, that as much as I do love that film, I still don't think it, you know, hits the highs of The Dark Knight. But I think we've been talking about The Dark Knight, this and that, but like to talk more about the scenes of the film, we're talking about Michael Mann's Heat, the opening of The Dark Knight, the bank robbery itself. I mean, this is arguably not only one of the best openings for comic book movies, but I would say one of the best openings for any movie ever. Like, we're talking about some of the most exciting, you know, twists and turns with this group. Like, Zeddy, what did you think of the bank robbery?
Yeah, I mean, that it sets the whole stage for everything that's to come, right? I mean, like, I personally, like, I've seen a lot of great opening scenes, but like there's not one that really is as intense as it is for long as it is, because it's almost like the second that you're seeing like what's happening, it's like, okay, well, all these guys have Joker masks, maybe one of them actually is the Joker, right? And it's such a clever, like, the way that Nolan's framing it, it's like they're all killing each other like one by one, and it's like, oh, I'm guessing the Joker sent you to kill me, right? And then boom, and then it's like the second that one guy comes out of the shop and he puts a bomb in
What
his
happened to
mouth,
the
and
rest of the guys?
right, and he's like, no, he said to kill the bus driver, and you're like, wait, what? Right? And it's like the second that like the Joker reveals himself, you're like, it just takes you away, and it's like there's I don't think that's really ever been captured, because it's like it sets the tone for what was to come.
And you have that amazing score by Hans Zimmer and
it's
James
incredible.
That is playing in that scene. Like, the score itself is a character.
Who the composers? I have no idea who these guys are.
I mean, and
you might have heard of them once or twice.
Yeah, there's sometimes
Hans Zimmer. Is that who that is? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Hans Zimmer.
They've done a thing or two.
Indie composer, but I mean that. I've been rewatching all of Nolan's filmography this past week, and I'm just stunned by the scores, because when you have, like, you could literally compile all the scores from Hans Zimmer's work, because Christopher Nolan didn't start working with Hans Zimmer until Batman Begins. He had David Julian, who he worked with on all the way going back to Following, and he worked on even The Prestige with this composer, but then he ended up becoming the collaborator with Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard. James Newton Howard, who doesn't get enough recognition for this movie and for Batman Begins, because people always say Hans Zimmer did this music, but it was he co-scored it with James Newton Howard. And I think James Newton Howard actually adds a lot of great themes to this franchise that, unfortunately, I will say The Dark Knight Rises score is missing some of James Newton Howard's touch. And, you know, so it's really great to see, it's really great to hear, actually, that score, especially in that bank heist and that opening. But yeah, like, that was just an incredible way to open this film. And it's also what a lot of people don't talk about enough is how different it is compared to Batman Begins. Because if you look at the way, like, Batman Begins feels like Blade Runner. It's saturated in these, you know, rainy.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
I mean, that is the inspiration. Like, that's one of the things that
it feels like an actual world.
Has said, but like the Narrows itself is reminiscent of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, and you get all that rain,
the mist.
But then when you have The Dark Knight, it's like, this is a city that's possibly healing. It's starting to get better. Gotham looks much better than it did in Batman Begins. It has a much cleaner look to it, and I love that in the opening of the film, because that is where we are introduced to all this chaos, and it's the chaos in this madness. And I also love the thing that kind of bothers me about a lot of other Batman movies is even The Dark Knight Rises. I don't care for Batman fighting in the day. I just don't feel like that is Batman to me. And The Dark Knight Rises, at least I will say, Bane kind of like forces his hand to do this.
Yeah.
But there are other movies where we see Batman, one of them being The Flash, where he's fighting in the daytime, and it just doesn't work for me. But when it comes to The Dark Knight, I love the idea that in that opening of the film, Batman can't be there. He can't fight because he's either sleeping or he is, at a board meeting, which I think is a really cool touch.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think too, again, I want to bring it back to that amazing semi-flip in the movie done at night.
Mhm.
I thought that whole chicken, the
They
playing
did
the
it in
game
one take too.
Yeah, which is so
Wow.
fucking insane. Like and even now, let me say, like having worked on movies for the last 6 years, some big films that I've worked on. One of them, a Marvel project that I just worked on, like the scale that they are able to do, but it's like I have so much more appreciation for The Dark Knight having been behind the scenes and seen how that semi flip had to go perfectly. Like
Yeah.
from a safety point of view to execution to fuck, we got to make sure every camera. I didn't look that up. I wonder how many cameras they used on the film itself, because to do that in one take, they had to get, I wonder how many cameras they had to use for that scene alone, because it's like, if one person fucks up, that's a take done. Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
okay, everybody has to, and that's the thing that's
Time to
most
buy another
cool.
semi truck.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the part. It's like, fuck. I've had to ask my AD friends, like, how many cars do we got for this crash?
Mhm.
And sometimes it's like, oh, we only got one, we only got two. So it's like everybody better be on their fucking A game when it comes to this, because if not, the director is not going to get the shot that he wants. The studio's going to be pissed, and maybe somebody might lose their job on this. It's like, and I think it's just too, I think the general audience would appreciate a movie more is if they took the time to look and see what went on behind the scenes, because it's an art form. It's an art form, from setting up the camera to making sure that the background and making sure people are out of the way, to dirtying up the cars to make them look old, to literally the stunt of flipping that semi, which still hasn't been done to this day since then.
Yeah.
It's like, we need to, I think, as a director, when I'm directing or when I'm being a DP or anything like that in the future, I hope more and more, because you're starting to hear more of like the directors and stuff shout out the crew, shout out those people that are behind the scenes that made it work. We need to keep doing that, because it's like we are the unsung heroes of that. Nolan directed the shit out of it, but it is because he had such a great crew behind him that he's probably worked with a lot. Oh, and I'll tell you guys a funny story after that. But so it's just insane, right? And then a funny story though. It's related to The Dark Knight Rises, right? I had a friend of mine, he worked in LA, and he was a second on The Dark Knight Rises. They filmed some of that in LA, no, that doesn't surprise me at all with, with the tax incentives that they had back then to film it, right? And this is hilarious. There was a PA that they brought on. He was a new PA, green. That's what you would call a PA that doesn't have much experience. And he was easily flustered, right? And in LA, they made an ordinance where the homeless could take a dump and use the restroom wherever they wanted on the sidewalk in public. They couldn't do anything about it, right? And they're about to film, I think it might have been the end battle, like the clash that they had.
God.
And they're in downtown LA, and a homeless guy took a dump on the road. And the PA is like flipping shit. He's like, what the fuck do I do? What the fuck do I do? And the second AD gets on the radio, he's like, shut up, get out of the way, There's nothing we can do about it. The PA got so flustered, and it fucked him up so much because of just the stress of that situation. He sat the walkie down on the ground and walked off set and didn't come back.
Oh my god,
dude!
My God.
That's a fun. Funny.
That's one thing about Nolan's films is the amount of practical effects, the amount
Yes.
of
Yes.
real people and real crowds, and
Yeah.
the
And it's
action,
like it takes so much to manage 400 plus background, which is probably what, especially in The Dark Knight with that clash, like to manage all that. It's a craft in of itself. It's like, fuck, all right, your group, go this way. Your group, go this way. Don't intersect at this point. Make sure you guys are listening to one another when we're doing this. It is
like, how
literally a
about
craft.
in The Dark Knight with the helicopters, when we're seeing the that,
Yeah.
because I think, like, really you could say the bank robbery, the bank heist is the big scene, like the opening of the film. But the real big scene of that film is that chase with the Batmobile, the Bat Pod,
Yep.
and the semi truck just flipping over. And that sequence, like, I'm Tyler, you just saw that in a theater. It's unbelievable.
It was glorious. It's glorious. It's so glorious to watch that on the big screen and be like, it's beautiful. It's even more beautiful on film itself because you see the film grain. And let me tell you the fun part. So the funniest part was, and it happens because you're working with film, they had to change the film mag to the next reel so they could finish the movie. So that actually happened in the theater, which we thought was really funny and cool.
Oh, wow.
Like, literally, there was
That's
like
amazing.
2 seconds where it went black, and they had to, they had to do their change. It was like for maybe like 5 seconds, but they had to do the change to finish the movie itself.
Zeddy, do you remember when you saw The Dark Knight? Do you remember the theater reaction?
Yeah, my theater was like as raucous as you can get, man. I mean, like, there was still that thing, like, when you see a Nolan movie where everybody's like, they kind of like, they're like quiet at first, 'cause it's almost like you have to take it all in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when you walked out of the theater, everybody was just like, "This is the greatest movie I've ever seen."
In that sequence, in particular, I still remember to this day when Batman, after he goes underneath the truck and it flips, and then he does that. Or is it called a whirly? What's it called?
Yeah, when he twirls around and he
When
falls.
he
up,
swirls
yeah.
around.
Yeah.
The theater went nuts. They were like,
Yeah.
yeah, because, like, that was so cool to see. That Batpod,
Mhm.
you didn't really see in the trailers how agile it actually is and how it can actually move in those different ways.
Mhm.
That really blew people's minds. And I think that is something to be said about the way Christopher Nolan shoots these. We're so used to now these comic book movies being shot on green screen or being shot with all this CGI, with even like DC films themselves, even the Batman, which utilizes it very well with the volume.
Yeah.
We're still talking about a film that still is being assisted by the VFX, where here there are, I think, a number of VFX in the film, but it's not to the point where it takes away from the story.
Yep.
It
Money well spent.
well spent.
And I think that's also the thing too that we as any filmmaker can, I think we all should revisit The Dark Knight from a directing perspective as well, and a money perspective, because for me, like two big examples of money well spent, and you can see the effort and everything, and it earns
Mhm.
that budget, is The Dark Knight. I would say the same for Mission Impossible Fallout and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
you
those
can
are,
tell that the budget went to things that mattered, and it was so
I mean,
expertly done, Kyle.
we're seeing that. I mean, even Nolan, when you look at
Mhm.
Tenet, when you look at
And
um,
Oppenheimer, I think, is going to show us that as well. That
Yeah.
he did, like, that's, I think, the coolest thing. I think the thing that I'm most excited for is to see them do the atomic blast. The blast was done practically on
yeah.
a
As
miniature
practically as
set.
they could.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with the
Right.
miniature set, which is
Yeah.
like,
Set an
I'm
actual bomb
very
out.
interested to
Yeah.
see that happen. You know, like, it
Only
was done,
Nolan.
but it was done like
That's
on a
something
miniature
to see
set.
in IMAX. Like that's to see
Well,
in
and-
70 millimeter.
Speaking of IMAX, we should also point out that reportedly a couple things. One, they had broken at least a couple of cameras working on The Dark Knight.
Yeah,
They were-
which isn't that. So here's another thing too, like for the general audience to know too, it isn't uncommon for that to happen on a film set too. By
Yeah.
the way, especially if we're doing stunts like a semi flip, like
Yeah.
Mhm.
they're and also very much insured and everything like that. But it does make it interesting to hear how these things happen. But keep
Yeah.
going.
And the-
Sorry about that, Matt.
And the other
Sorry.
thing I also want to say about Chris Nolan, which I think this actually did help him better as a filmmaker, was because the one issue I had with Batman Begins and why I don't hold it in high regard, even as a Batman movie like Zeddy does over
You're gonna say
here.
the fights, aren't you? You're gonna say the
Yeah,
fights.
because they're cut so close. It's presented so close. It's cut way too rapidly. Whereas I remember watching The Dark Knight, even watching it again on 4K with my grandmother a couple months ago who had never seen it before. And watching the two back to back, it was like literally night and day, no pun intended. And what I loved about it was it's almost like Chris Nolan knew working with these IMAX cameras, which are bulky, they're huge. You can't put them on like a shoulder rig or anything, and it's loud, and the sound is clunky in of itself. And he must have realized during those test runs or even the earlier days of filming The Dark Knight is like, okay, I have to change it up a bit. I have to show it to where when we're doing these IMAX cameras, or even if they're not IMAX cameras, I want the audience to see everything that's going on geographically in terms of spatial awareness. And when he's doing that chase sequence in the tunnel, which is a fantastic scene, by the way, what I love about it is the fact that we're able to see geographically where Batman is in conjunction to where Joker is already with, like, Gordon's the team that's escorting Harvey Dent to jail. And another thing too I love about it, we already talked about the music, is like at times it's not used as like all throughout the film as you thought. Like that whole tunnel chase sequence, there's only a few music cues throughout that sequence, but for the most part, Chris Nolan and his crew knew that with the maximum amount of intensity that we have here, there's no way that we can make it even more tense by putting in music. It's like, guys, it's overkill. Like, like he could have easily done it. And that's the other thing that a lot of comic book movies, even just action movies, kind of fail at doing, is that they
It's
don't
letting it breathe. Letting it breathe.
letting it
It's-
breathe and not putting a whole lot of music in
Yeah.
there.
I believe it's when the Batmobile crashes, that's when the music starts. Because then you see the Bat
yeah.
pod.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Once
so
the
like
Bat
there's
pod leaves.
there's like a transitional cue to
Yeah.
going, because the whole crew goes upstairs, and then there's like a little like low hum when Batman's about to inch closer to hitting Joker with the bike. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot of music cues used during that sequence.
Yeah.
At least
And
that I
it's funny,
noticed.
like a lot of people talk about how Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, like they're not funny movies, or I mean, I don't know how you can say that, because the thing with The Dark Knight is there are a lot of funny jokes in that film. One of them being in that sequence when you see those kids and they're like pretending to shoot at this car that blows up, or the guy that's trying to pick his teeth, and then the bat part. I just love how Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and I can't recall, I think maybe The Dark Knight Rises too. It shows you like these civilians and like just how Batman's destroying all this property. And it's funny because like when you look at Man of Steel, everyone's saying, "Oh, look how Superman destroyed Metropolis and all that."
Look
and
how fake everything looks.
But they make Batman versus Superman. It's all about Superman's actions. But then you see in Batman Begins and Dark Knight, Batman's just destroying all this property, and he doesn't get like any. I mean, at the end of the Dark Knight, people are hunting him, but like it's not as big of a deal compared to like what Superman does. But going back to it all, I do want to mention some of the characters. So we do have Batman. We have Christian Bale returning. To me, he's my favorite Batman. I don't.
This city is full of people ready to believe in good.
Where are they?
Where are they?
Where is Harvey Dent?
I love what's also I mean, we need to talk about the fact that Nolan, especially with Dark Knight, because I think the entire trilogy is really perfectly cast. But Dark Knight is that one film where I think Nolan takes full advantage of the entire cast. Where when you see actors like Gary Oldman, like Morgan Freeman, like Michael Caine, you do think, oh, well, they have the potential to be wasted. And yet they aren't. Every single one of them does get that moment to shine, and that one scene that it's actually surprising given the fact that it is such a massive ensemble. And that's true with all of Nolan's films, going all the way back to, well, I would say Following, but Following is such a small cast.
It's a small, it's like it's a project.
Really, I would say it goes to Insomnia, maybe you could say. But like,
I think it's also phenomenal too that Nolan had Robin Williams in one of his freaking movies. Like, of all people, that's amazing. He did such and that's also
Robin
a great
Williams,
performance.
Heath Ledger. Look at these actors that we've lost. I mean, even just Batman Begins, Rutger Hauer, who, I mean, he doesn't have that performance in the film like Heath Ledger, but I still really, really love Rutger Hauer in Batman Begins.
The Hitchhiker, man. The Hitchhiker or the Hitcher. What, and it's so good. So good.
I mean, that's the thing about Nolan, though. He gets these actors that you tend to not really notice for a while in Hollywood, and then he brings them back, like in Inception. You have Tom Berenger, and you have a number of actors that appear, Ellen Burstyn in Interstellar. Like it's really
and Matt Damon, and also too, I think it's great that he brought Matt Damon into Interstellar and started using him sporadically in his stuff too.
I think though he does have that
repertoire,
bringing back these actors, because if you look at The Dark Knight, these are actors that he works with. But I mean, Batman Begins, Christian Bale, Michael Caine returned for Prestige, and then going into Inception, he takes some of those actors, brings them into Dark Knight Rises, takes Anne Hathaway, brings her into Interstellar.
I think what also helps too with Chris Nolan is that like he's worked with, like, by the time he got to The Dark Knight and Inception, the fact that like his experience working with these actors and actually almost like entrusting, like, I know you're going to do a good job. I'm going to give you the role. And, if we have any sort of like, he has a dynamic between each of these, famous actors. And that's why, I said earlier, that's why a lot of actors want to work with him, because he has such a healthy relationship. He's not some arrogant prick or a problematic director like David O. Russell is, or Woody Allen, who have very problematic past in their field, or even Roman Polanski is another one.
Yeah.
Where those are, well, more Roman Polanski and Woody Allen, where it's like, I don't know if we should work with this guy anymore. yeah, no, and yeah, Chris Nolan does a great job, and also he managed to get Eric Roberts into a decent performance
Yeah.
for
Oh,
once.
I love him as Maroni, and it's
That fall, by the way, it still terrifies me.
Oh.
No matter what screen I watch it
I'm
on.
counting
When
on
he
it.
just drops. Oh my god.
And I mean,
Oh
I also love the scene in the car with him and Two-Face because he's like,
yeah.
I forgot what he says. Something like, well,
He
not
rats out the cop. Yeah.
today's not your day, and he says,
Yeah.
well,
Oh, he shot the bus driver. No, he
Not
shot
them.
the driver.
The driver.
He's
The
like,
driver.
oh yeah, it wasn't your day. You're good, but it wasn't the bus driver. It wasn't the driver's day, and shot
Right.
the bus driver, which
And
I thought
then-
was such a good scene.
I mean, the performance. I really love Aaron Eckhart in this film. He is, I think, arguably the heart and soul of the film. Even though you do have, Christian Bale, but I think Aaron Eckhart, what he brings to that performance as Harvey Dent, is such a real and human performance that you immediately like him from the opening scene where he's like, I recommend you buy American.
Mhm.
And
Yes, he's just so charismatic too.
Yeah.
And who was it? I think it was somebody tweeted out today or yesterday talking about they really wish that Eckhart got more
yeah,
recognition and more roles after The Dark Knight that fit
Yeah.
that. And I kind of agree. Like, and it's
'Cause-
very
and
worthy.
I think when you're talking about this tweet, also talked about how like Heath Ledger kind of overshadowed.
yes,
these
that's what I was literally about
performances.
to say.
And
it's like-
I still argue against it because I do think that all these actors gave incredible performances,
Yes,
and that's just the
And that's
nature
it.
of
Yeah,
the Joker
it's an
himself.
ensemble. It's an
Um,
ensemble that couldn't be
like-
beaten.
Like
It can't be beaten.
Gary Oldman, Michael Jai White, who he has a really small role, but it is a role that is
From
felt.
Spawn.
Like, I love when he's like, "Enough with the clown,"
Yeah.
and he just, like a thousand, a thousand a lot, a thousand. Wait, no, it's like
500 grand for this clown and a
Alive,
million
a
alives, like
billion
alives,
yeah.
manners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
but-
I love the. Oh wait, the pencil disappeared.
Oh yeah, the
Make this
magic trick.
pencil-
Yeah.
It's a
Magic
whoa,
trick.
and then he's like, "Let's not blow this out of proportion here,
Yeah.
guys."
Yeah.
Like it's so
well,
good, so
I-
good.
I think what also helps too with Aaron Eckhart with him being Two-Face is that you need someone, as Tyler said, you need a really charismatic actor to pull that role off.
Yep.
Because if you don't find him likable or even charming, his downward spiral, which is the main crux and the whole biggest
Mhm.
consequence of
Mhm.
of Batman himself and even Gordon, if you don't get that piece right, it doesn't work nearly as well as a movie. And that's something I always appreciate when these films, whenever action films, or just even really good sequels like Empire Strikes Back or Godfather Part 2, is that like to up the stakes from the last movie, you need to have consequences and you need to put them in like, even tighter situations to where it's like, what's something that we could do that isn't a repeat of the other one? Like the first
Yeah.
one, it was him adjusting himself as Batman and, fighting, stopping the League of Shadows from destroying Gotham City, a beloved city that he felt was worth saving. Now we're in a position where Batman is psychologically battling the Joker.
Yeah.
And even Joker said, "Do you think I'd lose the entire heart of Gotham with a fist fight with you?" It's like, no, I had my ace in the hole, and that was Harvey Dent. And
All it
and he
takes is a little push.
yeah, and it's like he knew that like the only way to truly beat Batman and Gordon and everyone else was to turn Harvey against them and make them believe that everyone surrounding Harvey was responsible for Rachel's death and his disfigurement. And that's something that it's like, yeah, it's the biggest consequence of the character. And Batman realizes that in order for us to win and not let the criminals run around free and all that work would have gone to waste, I have to be, that person that killed those people.
And
So,
I
yeah, it was
also
interesting.
do find it fascinating the psychological game that the Joker and Batman play with one another. Like, you really do think when you're first watching it, like, could Batman really fucking kill him? Like, he was ready to beat him like beat him to a pulp.
Oh yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
I that's all I want. Like that's basically what Joker's saying. That's all I want is for you to crack and for you to become the very thing that you swore never to be, because everybody has that in them. Not everybody, everybody's got that trigger. Like if you hit that trigger, no matter how small it is, that you flip that switch and it's over and it's done with. And it's like I do find it very he's like I think Bruce sacrificed so much when it came to this. He sacrificed basically the love of his life to save the city, and it's like I feel for that hero's journey that he went through with that, and it makes everything so much better.
What's really interesting, that's one of the best scenes in the film when he is interrogating the Joker.
Yeah, and when
he pulls him up.
And he locks the door. He's and Gordon's like, "Fuck, let's get in there. Like this isn't gonna go."
I love when he slams his head and he's like, "Never start with the head. The victim gets all fuzzy."
And he
just bangs his hand. And he's like, and I mean, like the thing is that's a scene where the movie is getting really, because I think up to that point, I mean, we've had the hanging of the Batman on the window. We've seen the sequence where he kills Michael Jai White, Gamble, and there's a number of other gruesome sequences. But this is the turn of the film where we really start to see how dark this film can go, and it's at that point for a PG-13 film. And he locks the door. He's losing control. But I also love how you're seeing Joker say to him, "I don't want to kill you," and you get to see in a slightly similar way to what they did in the Batman, where you see what Batman's actions have caused among the city of Gotham, because Joker in a way is similar, like in a weird way, a similar type of figure to Batman, but instead of trying to save the city, he's just bringing it to chaos. But he's still breaking the law in various ways. He's still wearing a mask. He's still doing these things with these theatrics that, I mean, isn't all that different from what Batman does, except the way he goes about it is really, really, really different.
Also, I want to bring up the fact too that in a PG-13 film, you have a guy that has a bomb sewn into his stomach in the jail. Like that's some really really on the cusp of R-rated horror type stuff. Like to see the thing vibrate in him, and he's like, "Oh my god, I have something in me." He said he was gonna get it out, and it's like that's some really messed up stuff that they were able to put away with in a comic book movie, which hadn't been done before either.
Joker burns Mr. Lau alive on the stack of money.
Yeah. Oh my god, yeah. You don't see him on fire, but I wondered about that too. Like when I was rewatching it on film, I'm like, I totally forgot that he had been put on the top of the stack.
Yeah, they threw money at him.
And I'm like, oh my god, he's fucking using him as like a funeral pyre. Like, Jesus, I didn't even I forgot about that.
And then he feeds the check-in to the dogs, which is really, I mean, one of the things I love about The Dark Knight is the fact that everything is placed in this movie for a reason. And when you see this guy at the beginning of the movie, you're like, oh, this is just a random gangster character that, Batman's going to have to stop. But then the fact that those dogs that attack Batman cause him to get a new suit, and that suit is what ends up helping him stop the Joker at the end of the film. Mm-hmm. And it's because with the
with the blade,
run out
the blade.
No,
I forgot about that.
These, and then he shoots them at him.
The other thing too I liked about the movie, and it's really something I always admire and like about action movies, is that the sense of escalation.
Yes.
that was always
Oh, yeah.
pointed out at
Oh,
the end
yeah.
of Batman Begins is, like even the finale, for as much as a lot of people want to criticize the last hour of the movie and how much it just goes by way too fast, where you're like, hold on, I need a minute to breathe. Let me get a drink or something. At the same time, though, it's like that's kind of the point of the movie that it's trying to prove. It's this sense of escalation going on, and it does get crazier in the last hour and a half of the movie, which is nonstop. And I do like some of that. At the same time, it goes on a bit too. Like, okay, just give me I know it's like a 2.5 hour runtime, but you got to give me a minute to breathe. Yeah. So I thought that was good. And props to Lee Smith for his editing techniques on it.
Breaking news. The Writers Guild has fired a labor grievance against Universal for, did you guys see on social media when they were cut, they trimmed the trees?
Yeah, they broke the tree law.
Yeah, which is like, I wondered about that yesterday. I'm like, can they really do that? Like, I don't think that's their property. And they just filed a labor agreement, a labor thing against them.
But, we haven't talked about, what did you guys think of Maggie Gyllenhaal?
I thought she was great. She's so good. And I really do think, like, I think the biggest casualty in the Dark Knight trilogy that I just got to that part in the Dark Knight. I need to finish it, which I'll probably do after we're done with this. I mean, I've seen the Dark Knight many times, or the Dark Knight Rises. I mean, I think the biggest casualty is Alfred in this whole situation. Like, to have somebody, he's been Bruce's protector since he was a kid, and to have Bruce so selfishly kick him to the curb the way that he did when he was just trying to, and that's a casualty of Batman, is like, she wasn't never gonna be with him, she picked Harvey, but and in order to protect Bruce, he burned the letter. I think that's also another silent hero in the Dark Knight trilogy is Michael Caine. I mean, he's so good.
Like, Zeddy, as you were talking about with Batman Begins being your favorite, I still I have to be like, is it Batman Begins or Dark Knight for me? But one of the standout moments in Batman Begins,
it's their relationship,
and also that
so
sequence
beautiful
when Alfred saves him in the end of the film, when he's like, I really hope you're not a member of the fire brigade, when he knocks the guy out and then goes into save him.
He tells him, what's all the bloody point with all those push-ups you do?
Yes.
Which is something that we've never seen Alfred do in live action. We're so used to Alfred, Michael Gough's portrayal, brilliant portrayal in my opinion, but like, he's always been the ailing, sickly Alfred that is not able to really fight or anything. So Michael Caine has a little bit more experience with that. But then, I really do, like Tyler, you mentioned Alfred. Michael Caine is so good when he tells him that story in The Dark Knight about how they had to burn
the jewels. Like, that's just so good. It's like, some men just want to watch the world burn. And that's very prevalent for today too. There are a lot of people out there that want to stir up trouble just to watch people crumble from it. And it's like that, it's still so prevalent.
That's what makes it so timeless.
Yep.
That feeling.
You will always have those people. You will always have those anarchists that are part of our society, that it's like, and that's why too, like, it's almost like that the only way to really cure the disease of the Joker, granted, he didn't kill him, but it's like, and you kind of wonder that too, like, how they're going to continue the Joker when it comes to the new DCU, like, he is a virus.
Change it up a bit.
Yes.
He's but it's like, is unpredictable.
But it's also like, he's going to keep popping up. So I wonder if there will be that time, like, in any of these iterations, that Bruce has to do what Henry Cavill had to do with Zod. Like, there's only one way that this is going to end, and it might be with the Joker dying. Like, I wonder if there will be an iteration where that might have to happen.
I think they'll only do that in the final film or something.
Yeah.
I don't think you will ever, because that's the thing with the Joker and Batman, right? He can never kill the Joker until like it's like the Killing Joke is, I believe, along with Dark Knight Returns, like one of the only times where he actually does kill the Joker. And it's something that it's always at the end of his rope because it's Batman being pushed to that limit where it's like there's no other way. And unfortunately, I don't see the DCU exploring that because they want to, I think, bring back the hope that the DC universe offers compared to Zack Snyder's world, where it was a very realist world that it was not as much, there wasn't as much hope to be found.
But will this happen though?
Yes.
I wonder if this will happen though within the Matt Reeves
Reeves, the
universe,
Batman,
which would be really, and that's the thing too. Like I hear we've debated it together, Kyle. Like I wonder if they need to bring the Joker into that. Like, is there a way that they don't do that? Like, is there a way that they have even? I mean, it's inevitable. You know, it's like two unstoppable forces. You can't stop them, and they're gonna collide.
When the irresistible force meets the immovable object.
Yeah, and I think it's
dog chasing cars.
Yeah, man. I'm really fascinated to see. I'm really fascinated to see if there's ever gonna be a performance that beats Heath's performance ever.
I don't think so.
I think
the only thing you can do is you can get up there, like you can beat him, but like that is, I really, whenever I
especially since he won an Oscar for it too, it's really hard.
Yeah.
But
also,
we should say
Joaquin just won it too.
Yeah, but that was distinctly different. I mean, that was like, you can even argue that wasn't even really the Joker.
There's anybody that's gonna measure up to it. They're gonna just do like Joaquin did, you know, like make a performance that is different but can rival. You know, that's all that you can ask for.
It's funny that also too. So we have Vito Corleone, Joker, and who? Oh God, Juanita, I think it was from West Side Story. Where we have. I'm sorry. What was the character's name?
Oh my God. Anita.
Okay.
Anita Moreno. Yeah.
Yeah, like her character. Like we've had 3 characters that managed to win. At least 2 actors their Oscars, and I just find it very very interesting that that's the case. And
I think I will start to wrap up here, but I will say that one of the things I do want to point out are like the comics that influenced this film, because what's funny about the Dark Knight is that as much as a lot of people like to say, oh, the Dark Knight trilogy isn't like the comics, it's so different from the comics, like the criticisms of the Batman costume I still see on Twitter, and I just have to laugh because I think my favorite Batman costume is the Dark Knight. Dark Knight Rises, that costume, because it really, I think, encapsulates not just a really cool looking Batman on screen suit, but a very mobile one that he can actually turn his neck, and it was something that really didn't happen before. Usually they made him unable to turn his head and all that, but I think some of the interesting comics that inspired this film, one of them is The Long Halloween, by
a
Jeff
good one.
Loeb and Tim Sale, who actually, they took that comic, that graphic novel, and they had that inspire the Batman. So it's funny because like the parts of that graphic novel are the Gordon, Harvey Dent, and Batman team, and them trying to stop down this organized crime and all that. Then you have the Batman kind of more explores that organized crime and serial killer angle of that story. Now, they also were inspired I wouldn't say it was inspired by, but they looked back and they saw how eerily similar the very first appearance of the Joker was in like Batman #1, where he actually goes and tries to poison a number of these high officials. I think one of them might be the mayor, and he gives them like a timer of when he's going to kill them all. And it's funny to me that I don't even think they intended for it to be like that, but it has that, connection there. There are some references to The Dark Knight Returns. It's really, I think, a testament to the writers of those comics that we get to see their work, reinterpreted in this modern day. Because, 15 years, it doesn't really it feels long, but it doesn't really seem as long as it, really is. And it's so funny to me because you now have all these Batman movies that have been made since, whether it's Dark Knight Rises, The Batman, even the Lego Batman movie. I somewhat count Batman v Superman in that angle. And now 15 years later, you still have The Dark Knight, and it's still like the golden standard. Which, do you guys see? Do you think a film can ever beat The Dark Knight? Like, do you think we'll ever see that happen?
Don't think so.
Yeah.
Tyler,
it was almost like a zeitgeist. Like, it was right at the moment when it came out, and on top of that, it's like, look, there's a lot of really good comic book movies now, but I don't think any of them hold a candle in terms of like how they were made on a technical level. Like, we didn't even talk a whole lot about the visual effects outside of like Nolan does a really good job using very minimal CG effects, but even on Harvey Dent's face, there's a good blend of practical and CG work. And even when Batman, this will be going into my final thoughts on the film, if you don't mind, Kyle, but even when Batman goes into where is it he has to go to, Hong Kong, and he jumps off the building, like I didn't even know that was done through on a green screen, like that jump that he does, because it looks so like like he's right there. I'm not sure if you guys knew about that.
That was done on a green screen?
Some of it was done on a green screen.
That's one heck of a skydiver, then. If that's the case.
Because I'm pretty sure that there's like a wide shot that you see of like someone on the roof, and that might have been a stunt double. But during those close-ups where you see him putting on the mask and then putting the timer on, I'm pretty sure that's done on a green screen. And then when he does the jump, that's done in like a studio, with like a base platform setup. Yeah.
Wow.
Because I didn't know about that either until I was watching the Oscars and I saw the VFX breakdown for that. I'm like, oh shit, okay. So like, I'll have to send you that if I find it again.
Yeah, great. It's great you mentioned the Hong Kong, because that's one of the other standout sequences. This film, I believe, it's the first blockbuster film shot on the IMAX cameras, right? Like, I don't like there wasn't one before that, and you get to see that, and I love that they kept that aspect ratio change on the physical media, because that moment where you see that Hong Kong sequence, it's just so visually stunning. And especially when he gets pulled out at the end and you just see it retracting into the plane, and you see him and Mr. Lau going the plane. You even see it like close too. Like you see them walk in, and it's like, wow, that's just incredible. And it's like, man, like I don't know. I mean, the Batman, I think, came close for me to like the Dark Knight, but it's still not up there. And Zeddy, go ahead. Like maybe talk about any final thoughts you have.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only logistical way I can see any Batman movie being better than The Dark Knight is if it actually does get nominated for Best Picture, which I don't think will ever happen if The Dark Knight couldn't do it, but never say never, I guess, in Hollywood, as things are constantly changing. My final thoughts are that this movie is just timeless. It's a movie I can watch any day of the week. It's still as culturally relevant as we kind of said this whole podcast. It's a rare movie where the villain essentially wins the whole time, where the villain wins and the hero loses. So it really is just a journey that you got to go through with a movie. And we don't see movies like this anymore. where it's like, it's a movie that kind of makes you think, but it's a movie that puts humanity right on its rear end, right? And that's kind of like the odd part, is that just how ahead of its time the movie is, and just how the Joker's dialogue is still so resonant even today, which makes it even more all the more scary, which is how right he actually was in that movie. But it really is one of the greatest movies ever made, and it'll always be something that, if you're into film, you want to get into film, this is a movie that'll always be on my top 10 list, to get to know and to get to study, because there's a lot that went into this.
Yeah, and I mean, the you're right. Like, it's so timeless, but it's also a film that, when you're looking on the outside, it's a film that is a sequel that manages to feature this character like the Joker in such, I think, a really well utilized way. Where when we look at Batman Begins, I think some people criticize it for not having the villains that we're used to, whether it's like Joker or Catwoman or such and such. But I think it was the way that Joker enters this film is such a natural way that feels genuine and it feels right. And that's something that, when you have Jack Nicholson, Cesar Romero, Mark Hamill as like prior Jokers, it's really hard to come up with something so brand new. And they were able to do it because, like, this Joker, he has this long hair, this messy hair. He doesn't quite have the same Joker look that some people are used to. Like, this is makeup. This isn't, acid on his face. And I think that really does show you that this film is different, but still honoring what has come before. And I do want to mention, before I forget about it, what I do love is how they take this damsel in distress trope that we're so used to in superhero films. I mean, we got it for 3 Spider-Man movies when we had the Sam Raimi trilogy. And they flip it on its head because he can't save the girl when it comes to The Dark Knight. And then in The Dark Knight Rises, what they do is they make the damsel, Miranda Tate, actually the villain, and Talia al Ghul. And Batman technically becomes the damsel, and Selena Kyle, Catwoman, has to save him. So you do have that angle where it's no longer just the girl in trouble. Because if you look at Batman Begins, it follows that traditional model. But Dark Knight pushes the envelope and it pushes the boundaries of what we're used to. And that's what makes it as memorable as it is today. Tyler, I don't know if I could hear you before. Can you speak? I can't hear.
Am I back?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Do
Sorry
you have any
about
final
that.
thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think The Dark Knight is I think on my list of top movies, I think it's in the second or third spot for me, for my top movies of all time. It inspired me to want to work in movies, and look where I'm at right now. And I do think it is as timeless as it can get. And I think, I think the only person that I think could top The Dark Knight, in my opinion, it could be Matt Reeves with the Batman Part 2. I think we are in for a big treat with that, because look at what he did with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Like, he trumped the first one in such an amazing way, and I think Matt Reeves really is getting to the core of the Batman lore when it comes with his films.
Yeah.
And Greg Fraser's cinematography in the Batman is some of the best that you will ever see from any movie. Like, it doesn't feel like a comic book movie either. It feels like a guy trying to battle the forces of darkness, and it feels like a crime movie, like The Dark Knight, which I think is what made me like the Batman so much as well. Is it didn't feel like a comic book movie. It felt like, somebody trying to take out the mob, and I think the cinematography, the stunts, everything from the core of how it was made is something that I think a lot of filmmakers have tried to do and they
Mhm.
don't. The movie's freaking phenomenal, and again, like on film, on the 35 millimeter, it was absolutely spectacular to watch. I hope you guys at some point it will come to a theater near you guys where you guys can witness that, because it's a treat unlike anything other. And again, I think it's going to be very, 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 very hard for anybody to top what Heath did. And I hope the next performance that we see as the Joker, I think we're probably going to get that from the Matt Reeves films more so than in the DCU. I really hope it maybe takes some of what Heath did, but do it in a different way that honors maybe Heath's legacy, but also makes it its own, like they did with Joker itself. I'm very happy. Like it's a film that I you can watch so many times and you don't get bored watching it. It is, and that's seldom do you see that from a Marvel movie nowadays. Like that is
I do want to state the fact that I personally believe, I don't know if you guys share the same sentiment, but I personally believe that the Batman is a much darker film
yes, then The Dark Knight. And
Oh,
I
so
think
some of those Riddler kills. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
holy shit.
There aren't as many moments of levity, I feel, in the Batman
Yep.
Yeah.
than there are in
It is
The Dark
also,
Knight.
but I also do think that it is interesting to see how the boundary line for a PG-13 film
Mhm.
has shifted. And I think The Dark Knight shifted it for them so they could make a darker movie without it crossing the line into R. And I think the Batman even pushed it even farther along, which I think
Mhm.
is good, because there's a certain line that I think as film progresses, you can push that line and not have it cross that boundary. But I think the Batman does a really fine job at being on the line.
I think the DCU Batman's going to have to be lighter because
Of course it will
what
be.
we're
I
gonna
think it will
see
be.
right
I
now,
think
like
yeah.
the darkness it's like pushing to the limit now. Now we're like right at this could potentially be R. And I think that what we'll see with the DCU Batman Brave and the Bold is that will be a more lighter Batman in a similar
think
way
it
to
will
what we
be
kind of saw
Christian
with the
Bale.
Flash.
I think it will be a Christian Bale type of Batman, I would think, because it's still not super, super, super dark. It's dark
Yeah.
enough. I don't, I
Like,
think
I
there
mean,
will
Christian
be more,
Bale Batman, but like with
more
'cause
comedic.
Even Dark
Yeah.
Knight Rises, like Bane full on snaps people's necks and it's
Yeah.
pretty brutal. I think
Yeah.
the villain is going to have to be, I think, a lot lighter, and it's not going to be as, serial killery as we have gotten. Not that there's anything wrong with either or, but I think we need to establish like a contrast, because if all of your Batman content is this dark, I think it's harder to continue to push the limit. But by going back to the light, I think that will kind of like what they did with the Spider-Man series, right? Because like Amazing Spider-Man made it a little bit
Excuse
darker.
me, the Spider Boy series.
And then Spider Boy, or Iron Man Jr., as we call Tom Holland Spider-Man.
Yeah,
ended up making it a lot more lighter, like with Homecoming,
Yeah.
for instance.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, I'm probably the only one here who thought the Batman by Matt Reeves was just okay. I had a lot of issues with the film in terms of like way too long, wasn't nearly as dark as I wanted it to be. I could probably get into a whole discussion on that some other
Mhm.
time, but I just thought overall it was just okay. And I think I've actually I think I've voiced my frustrations with the movie as clearly as I did. I think when it came out, when I told Zedian, a mutual friend of ours, of why I wasn't a huge fan of the film, but we could argue about that or fight to the death about that another time. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really like The Dark Knight is way more widely praised than
Yeah.
the Batman is. Which,
Yeah.
but it's
Oh, yeah.
also not been
Great,
out
yeah.
as long. It's also not been out as long too.
No,
So
no.
I do think that there's gonna be I think there's like The Dark Knight. I think it's gonna keep gaining its cult following
But
of people
I think
that
the thing
love it.
with the Batman is the fact that, like Matthew pointed out, like it has that longer run time. It has like there
Yeah.
for me, like The Dark Knight. That's a film that, you know, a lot of people had a lot of fun going to see, where the Batman is more of a film that you sit with and you like embrace how, you know, how deep that film can be. But The Dark Knight is more of a film where you can see like a bat pod chase sequence, or you can
It's more
have
of a
fun
spectacle.
watching Hong
Yeah.
Yes, spectacle. That's a great term for it. So
Mhm.
I mean, there's that. But to end it all off, I will just say The Dark Knight is you know, one of the two films in my life that inspires me, and with the other being Batman Begins. I think that is an incredible sequel. It matches up to its predecessor while also adding so many more new characters and so many new elements to this franchise and to this world. And I will also say that I mean, I haven't seen a number of the films that were nominated for the 2008 Oscars, or 2009 if you count when it came out. But I still will say that I think that Dark Knight was better than Slumdog Millionaire. I don't care because I saw that movie. And the Dark Knight is better than Slumdog Millionaire.
All I will say is to make it short and sweet. All I will say is, while I agree with you, The Dark Knight is better than Slumdog. I understand why Slumdog won.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
But
yeah.
we'll talk about.
I mean-
if you guys want, we can talk about that some other time. So
Yeah, but I mean, I think it was also a different time then, where we had, I think, a lot more jaded, you know,
there was a lot
Academy
of things.
members.
There was a lot of things as to why it won. But again, we'll talk about that some
Yeah.
other time. So
But I mean, I think the big difference here, though, is the fact that we're still talking about The Dark Knight. And I mean, all respect to all these movies that have been nominated for Best Picture. And I think them winning Best Picture is really important because that's them getting their chance to shine and be remembered
except
for
for
that.
Crash.
Except for Crash.
Go ahead.
And Green Book. But like, you look at these films that sometimes it's the film that isn't nominated that is the film that a lot of people remember. The film that is
Like
Tyler,
Into the Spider-Verse.
but as Tyler pointed out, it's on the top 3, you know, greatest movies for Empire. I mean, Empire Strikes Back wasn't even nominated for Best Picture. So
Yeah.
you really do have, I think, a movie here that I like to think of these films as like graphic novels in their own right. And this is one of those ones where it's not a straight up adaptation of the other Batman comics, but it tells its own story. And because of that, it's that much more special. So that will be it for now, guys.
Yep.
Thank you to all of you guys who joined me, Zeddy, Tyler, and Matthew. And thank you to anyone listening to this video. I hope you all have a good day. And please, if you haven't seen it already, or if you want to watch it, check out, you know, The Dark Knight. Because
If you haven't seen the movie yet, why did you even bother listening to our thoughts? We were gonna
Who
spoil the
knows?
whole thing. Come on.
who knows? I mean, it's pretty much a 2-hour live stream that we had. Maybe someone just wanted the vibe. I don't know. But yes, please, I hope that you did watch this movie before you watch this, because we basically spoiled everything, I think.
Yeah,
Rachel Dawes
effectively.
dies. Boom. Harvey Dent dies.
Yeah, Harvey
go.
Dent dies.
So, okay, guys, take care. Have a good day and peace.
Bye, guys.